You ever had an idea so big that even you had to stop and ask yourself, what the hell am I doing? Most people will never build their own hotel. It's not exactly something that you just wake up one day and decide to do, but somehow I ended up buying an old roadside motel, and now we're turning it into a beautiful boutique hotel here in Nashville. I didn't have a hospitality background, I had never operated a hotel before, but when I found a 2.5-acre site at a major intersection in my market, East Nashville, I just couldn't really walk away from this deal. And that's how I ended up in one of the more complicated, expensive, and unfortunately drawn out projects of my life. Lenders didn't want to fund a boutique hotel. Permitting took 18 months. The electrical and plumbing had to be completely redone. And at one point, I found out half the building was being held together by termites. But somehow, we're making it work. This is the story of how an old roadside motel is turning into Salt Ranch. I'm Tyler Cobble. I've been in commercial real estate for 12 years, but this is my first hotel. Most of my real estate projects start the same way. I see a piece of land or a building in the right location, and I just know there's potential. I don't go into deals thinking I have to build a hotel or I have to build apartments. I'm really more of a generalist. I look for strong opportunities and figure out the best way to make them work. This site was one that I had been watching for years. It's a 2.5-acre piece of property on a major corridor in East Nashville and seated at a lighted intersection. That kind of real estate is hard to come by, and I knew it had long-term redevelopment potential if that was what we ever decided to do. The property itself was an old roadside motel called the Congress Inn. It had been operating for decades, but it was clear that the owners were pretty tired of running it. I went back and forth with them for a while. At one point, they wanted $3.5 million. I offered $2.6 million, and eventually we landed on about $3 million. But at that point, I still wasn't sure exactly what to do with it. I knew it was a good deal, and the site was zoned for high-density development, so I had originally envisioned either micro apartments or micro offices, or maybe even a mixed-use concept. I had never built a hotel before, and I wasn't necessarily convinced that that was the right move. Then I got introduced to a hotel consultant, someone who had been involved with successful boutique hotels across the country. He had experience that I didn't, and really opened my eyes to this possibility. So after talking through the numbers and looking at comparable hotels in the area, it kind of started to click and make sense for me. There was a gap in the market for a boutique hotel that actually felt like Nashville. Something with real Southern hospitality, not just throw some guitars up on the walls and put a statue of Dolly Parton in the lobby. And that's when I made the decision we were going to renovate this old, pretty tired motel and turn it into a really cool boutique hotel. But of course, just making the decision was the easy part. The real work hadn't even started yet. Buying the property was one thing. Getting the financing to actually renovate and build the hotel, that was a completely different challenge, one that I hadn't really thought through properly. I assumed it was going to be tough. I knew that. It always is, especially when you're looking to finance a boutique hotel, but I just didn't realize quite how tough it was going to be. Most lenders didn't want to touch it. They wanted a flagged hotel, something like a national brand like Marriott or Hilton, because to them, for whatever reason, that's a safer bet. A boutique hotel with no brand, no track record, and an independent operator, that was a much harder sell, even though they tend to make a little bit more money. I talked to over 50 lenders. Some weren't interested at all. Others really liked the deal, but couldn't get comfortable with the risk that they were taking. It became a cycle of pitching, getting rejected, tweaking the approach, and then pitching again, over and over. And in the end, I couldn't secure a traditional bank loan in time to close. So I did what any smart real estate investor does. They go with hard money. It's not a great scenario, but it got the deal done. We were able to close, finalize our plans, and I raised enough capital from my investors to pay the hard money loan off only a few months later. Once we had a more concrete vision for the project, we went back to the banks to secure permanent financing. Eventually, I found a lender that saw the potential and got the loan in place. Looking back, I'm pretty glad that we structured the deal the way that we did. Hard money is unbelievably expensive, but it gave us the flexibility to move quickly, refine our plans, and get the right financing in place when we were ready. I had also negotiated the property at such a good price, about $1 million less than its actual value, that the hard money loan was worth it. It was one of the most frustrating and exhaustive parts of the entire process, but if you believe in a project, you keep pushing, and that's exactly what we did. When I first decided to move forward with the hotel, I had a big vision for what it could be. The original plan was a $17 million project. High-end finishes, a massive outdoor event space, and a complete transformation of the entire site. But once we started digging into the details, it became pretty clear that we would have to scale back. One of the biggest challenges was stormwater requirements. The original plan involved tearing up a big portion of the parking lot to create more green space. But that triggered a whole new set of regulations that would have added over $150,000 to the budget. That just didn't make any sense. So we had to rethink the site design. Side note, yes, removing impervious materials like asphalt and bringing back a pervious ground like normal grass triggered additional stormwater work, but leaving the asphalt didn't. Explain now. We scaled the project back to $10 million, focusing on what would create the best guest experience while still making financial sense for me and my partners. That meant focusing more on the existing structures and leading into what the property already had working for it. The goal from the beginning has been to create something that actually feels like Nashville. This is a city built on Southern hospitality, and I wanted it to come through in every part of the hotel. Salt Ranch also has a bit of a Palm Springs vibe, but with a Southern twist. Outdoor spaces, fire pits, and a focus on creating a space where people actually want to hang out. If you're going to do a boutique hotel, it has to be unique enough to attract people to it. If you were building your own hotel, what's the one feature that you'd absolutely have to include? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your ideas. The amount of land that we have in this deal is a huge, huge advantage. Most boutique hotels in Nashville are vertical. They're smaller footprints, taller buildings with everything packed in tight. But here we have 2.5 acres, which allows us to have a pool, a dog park, courtyards, and outdoor nooks. That's something you just don't see a lot of in this city, and it gives us a competitive edge. Everything that we're designing is with that in mind. How do we make this a place that feels different but still welcoming? A place that's high-end, but not pretentious. A place where both guests and locals want to spend time. That's what we're building. When you're renovating an older structure, you never really know what you're getting into until you start tearing apart the walls. And once we got into demo, we found plenty of surprises. The biggest issue was what we found behind those walls. A lot of the electrical was not up to code. It was actually 50+ years old and didn't have any insulation around it, and was therefore a fire hazard. The plumbing was technically working, but once we scoped the lines, we realized it was better to replace everything on the front end rather than risk any major issues after opening when that would just be disruptive to guests. And then there was the termite damage. Some of the studs were so rotted that they weren't holding up anything. Those are the kinds of problems you don't see when you're just walking through on a property tour, but they can add tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to the budget. So make sure that you try and bake that in as best as you can. One of the biggest unexpected costs came from structural issues on one of the buildings. Everything looked fine from the outside, but once we opened it up, we had to reinforce the structure before we could do anything with renovating that building. That's not a fun expense because guests will never notice it. Just like the electrical, just like the plumbing, they're not going to pay you more just because the things work. That's a minimum expectation, but it's one of those things that you just have to do. Another challenge was balancing what to keep and what to replace. The main building is the most historic part of the property, built in 1856, and we wanted to preserve as much of its original character as possible, despite it not being on the National Register of Historic Places. We kept the original wood flooring, the grand staircase, the old casework. I mean, the stuff is just absolutely beautiful. You can't recreate that kind of history. So if it was in good shape, we kept it. But some of the things just had to go. Originally, we thought we'd restore the old windows, but once we factored in labor costs, energy efficiency, and soundproofing, it just made more sense for us to go ahead and replace them with modern versions that still match the look that we were going for. Same thing with the walls. We added extra insulation and soundproofing barriers to make sure guests wouldn't hear every single conversation happening next door like you could when we first bought it. At this point, we're past the worst of the surprises, and now it's about bringing everything together, finishing out the interiors, dialing in the design, and making sure every detail is right before we open the doors to guests. Now, when you're dealing with a project of this scale, it's not just about construction and design. You also have to manage the expectations of your investors and your lenders. And And when things don't go according to plan, I promise you they probably won't, that's where communication becomes everything. The biggest challenge that we've faced on that front has been the permitting delays. What should have been a straightforward 6-month renovation permitting process turned into an 18-month waiting game. 18 months. That's a long time for investors to have their money tied up without seeing any progress. And it's a long time to hold a property without generating any revenue. But the key to keeping everyone on board is over-communicating. I made sure our investors knew exactly what was happening at every single step, whether it was an issue with the city, a delay with inspections, or a pivot that we had to make in the plans. The worst thing that you can do in a situation like this is just go silent or be unresponsive whatsoever. People will assume the worst, I promise you. But if you're upfront, it helps you build trust. Fortunately, we structured this deal very well from the beginning. We paid cash for the land, so we weren't sitting on massive carrying costs while waiting on our permits. We also kept our investors informed and never had to go back and raise additional capital, which is something that a lot of developers have had to do in this market. That's never a conversation that investors want to have. Lenders, on the other hand, they only care about one thing: risk. Delays, changes to the budget, unexpected issues, those can all make them nervous. Keeping financing in place meant reassuring them too that the project was still viable, that we were hitting our revised timelines, and that we had a clear plan to get this deal across the finish line. We have a phenomenal lending partner that has now done multiple deals with me, as well as other friends and clients, and they've worked with us every step of the way. But that's because we have communicated with them at every step of the way too. At the end of the day, real estate development isn't just about the physical buildings. Sure, of course, that's what you're buying, but it's about relationships. If your investors and your lenders trust you, they'll back you on this project and the next one. And that's exactly what we've worked to maintain throughout this entire process. Now that we're actually starting to get closer to the grand opening, which we're aiming for in May of this year, 2025, everything is shifting from construction to operations. Building the hotel is one thing, but running it is a completely different challenge. That's why we brought in a boutique hotel management firm very early on. We've been working with them for the last couple of years to develop the branding and fine-tune the guest experience and make sure that everything is in place before we actually open those doors. One of the things that sets Salt Ranch apart is that it's not just a hotel. It's a space that locals will want to be a part of too. The wine shop, the library, the bar will all be open to the public. The pool will primarily be for guests, but we'll open it to locals as well on a limited basis, creating a real community feel around the property. That's something that a lot of boutique hotels miss. Honestly, they focus so much on the out-of-town guest experience that they forget about the people who actually live in the city that could be their guests every day. We want Salt Ranch to feel like a part of East Nashville, not just a place to stay for the weekend. As for what's next, this definitely won't be the last boutique hotel project that we take on. We've learned so much from this entire process. What works, what doesn't work, and what we'll do differently next time. We already have other sites in mind, and now that we've been through the process once, the next one hopefully will be a lot smoother. But first, we're focused on making sure that Salt Ranch is everything that we envision. The grand opening is going to be a big moment, not just for us, but for our investors, our partners, and everyone that has been involved in getting this project across the finish line along the way. We'll be inviting everyone out for a big celebration, staying the night, hosting a pool party, and officially welcoming guests for the first time. So if you're on my email list, you'll be getting an invite. Otherwise, pay attention to my Instagram account for the announcement. Like I said, aiming for May of this year, could be pushed to June, but definitely summer of 2025. It's been a long road to get here. We're almost there. And once we open the doors, it's definitely going to be worth it. This has easily been one of the most challenging projects I've ever taken on. There were so many moments where it would have been easier to walk away, like when lenders just kept saying no, or the permitting dragged on for 18 months, or when we kept uncovering problem after problem during construction, which that will happen on a large-scale renovation. I even considered just listing and flipping the damn property at one point, but we pushed through, and now we're finally about to open. If I could go back and give myself advice, maybe you're considering doing your own boutique hotel, I would tell myself two things. First, don't be so ambitious on the budget. We started with a $17 million plan, which would have been hands down the coolest hotel in Nashville, But if I had designed it as a $10 million project from the start, we would have saved some time and a little bit of stress. And second, just be prepared for permitting delays. If I had known how long that process would take, I would have at least been prepared for that delay going into it. But at the end of the day, I don't regret any of it. We're creating something unique here, something that actually fits East Nashville, something that's going to be around for a long, long time. And I know that once people start staying at Salt Ranch, once they're sitting by the pool or having a drink in the library, it'll all be worth it. This is just the beginning. We've got other sites in mind, other boutique hotels that we want to build. And now that we've been through the process once, we know exactly what to do next time. So if you're thinking about getting into the boutique hotel industry and you're wondering how you can pull this whole thing off, I've documented the entire process. Check out this playlist here.